I just want to point out one thing. Are we gonna ignore the fact that Justin completely shaved right now? I don't know if that's his trigger or not, but he looks 10 years younger.
I want to
I feel like
retaliate
it's
so
a
bad.
whole nother person that's on this podcast.
Hey, keep my beard out of your mouth, man. Keep it out of your mouth.
Someone slapped your beard off. Oh man.
Dad.
Welcome to the Restoring Our City podcast. We took a breather. Man, we churned out 12 episodes in a row, and we just needed a quick break. So appreciate you guys listening and following along. We are back with another episode, and lots of stuff going on in the news, and we wanted to connect with you guys, and not just talk about the slap heard around the world, but from Will Smith. But we put some poll questions up on our Instagram, and a lot of you actually responded and shared your feedback. So we wanted to touch on that and just kind of the bigger picture of stuff going on dealing with the conflict. And so I've got my fellow co-hosts on here, Jessamine Thomas and Bejoy Samuel. What's going on, guys? Did you watch the Oscars?
Dude, we took 2 weeks off, and I'm just going to say it's just crazy that this happens in between. But we saw that moment live. And I'm like, is this staged? Is this not? What's going on? American TV censored it. It jumped on Twitter, and the Japanese TV stream had it uncensored. It was great.
Yeah, I didn't watch it live. I was actually at dinner with some friends, and then another friend texted a group me, and they're like, dang, Chris Rock just got smacked. I'm like, what? And so then we're all like, obviously on our phones, and everyone's talking about if it's, if it was for real or staged or anything like that. So, yeah. I think I did more research on that than I did the whole Russia, Ukraine in the last week, which is really sad, dude.
And everyone has an opinion about it. And I think we're kind of jumping on it, not to analyze, I think pick apart that situation to talk about, hey, celebrity gossip. I don't really care about that. But in terms of it really hit a chord with a lot of people, right? And it's interesting because apparently it's not staged, right? And it really did happen. So kind of wanted to talk a little bit about conflict and how we actually kind of react to some of those things. But like, guys, have you ever dealt with something like that in your life? I mean, we're not celebrities, but have you ever had to deal with something like publicly or a conflict like that?
I was going to say, it's probably because I was an unathletic, nerdy kid, but I never tried to get into physical violence because I know I'd get my butt whooped. So interestingly enough, it's funny, but I could sympathize a little bit with the Chris Rock side here, where he talks a lot about, being insecure, being bullied as a kid. Shoot, we made an entire show, Everybody Hates Chris, based off that entire period of life. And then, to have that done in the most public way, it's like, oh, I feel bad for this guy in some way. But no, in terms of a physical, violent altercation, haven't had it.
Yeah, I haven't either. I mean, I've been pissed off at times for sure, but I don't think it's ever escalated to that point where I've initiated. And I don't think I've annoyed anyone just enough for someone to come attack me, But it's interesting in this situation how dividing it is, right? Everyone's still divided on what the reaction should have been or who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah, totally true. And I was gonna say, Bejoy, not in your open mic days, you didn't throw some insults in the audience's way.
Okay, I did one open mic, dude. That's
No. For everyone listening out there, Bejoy does stand-up comedy. Come see him one day.
Right.
Headlining in a theater near you someday. But it's interesting you mentioned that, Bejoy. There are some divided opinions. And I actually wanted to share some of the comments that we got from our listeners where we asked the question, was Will Smith, was his actions justified? And we got a lot of responses, a lot of no's and a lot of O's strung along together. But some really interesting thoughts. I actually wanted to read a few of them. So one said, commend Chris Rock as he got disrespected to the highest degree live on TV and didn't retaliate. I thought that was really interesting. Another one said, the standard society has made is to justify any retaliation as long as any victim feels offense, which is another one. So a couple things, a couple other folks said, and if a white person had slapped Chris Rock, would they still have won Best Actor So just the race nuance was brought into it too. So lots of differing opinions, from our listeners too. So what do you guys think about it in terms of like conflicts? Especially something to trigger someone to react that way. How do you know what triggers someone to react? Is there a way to even know? And what's the line there?
I don't know if it's unless you really know someone well and you've seen them in a context of a lot of different environments, it's really hard to know what someone's trigger is. And I think I was telling you guys this earlier. I also think that what triggers someone in one instance may not trigger them in another instance, right? Like there's so many nuances to it. Like I rarely find someone who's triggered by the same thing consistently and every single time that something happens, right? Like there's other things that layer on to whether you're riled up by something in that moment or if you just let it pass,
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's really hard to again tell what triggers someone unless you're really close to them. But in some senses, the questions of like, well, there might be like general lines, right? Like we're not going to joke about very serious topics, or if you're going through something with like a crazy disease, of course, let's not make fun of it or light of it. So I think there might be like general fence posts somewhere, but once we start getting into nuanced sort of jokes and stuff, it's hard to sometimes tell.
Yeah, I think the health part of this, some folks felt like that was the line, right? Like you can't joke about disease and things like that, but then you're talking about a comedian who does this for a living and he's made fun of people. So where is the line? And if we create a line, then who monitors that line, and who is the judge, jury, and executioner of that line? It's like, how do you kind of measure it, right, and police it?
I was gonna say, like with comedians though, like they're unapologetically, like that's their job. They just make fun of everything, everybody. They don't care. People try to cancel them. Like that's the lifestyle that they have chosen, and I'm sure they're gonna offend people.
And so, like when we deal with things like that, I feel like this situation is a microcosm of like stuff that we deal with all the time. We've probably been offended to the point of, hey, I'm going to react, right? So, like, have you ever had to? You probably didn't get slapped on stage in front of thousands of people and rich and famous people, but have you ever had to restrain yourself from reacting to someone that you want to share?
Bringing this back
publicly?
to community, yeah, no, I was gonna say that you could share publicly, right? I think bringing it back to a community, I think a lot of times, especially when we deal with conflicts, especially within like church, right? I'll bring to that context. There are definitely things that get my blood to boil, and there are so many times, whether it's in a larger meeting or something that I like vehemently disagree with, that I want to react that way. I would say you two guys sometimes are restraining forces, because there will be things that I'm thinking about that I might want to say, that I might want to tell like a pastor or an elder. And honestly, I think both of you have probably asked me this question at some point. It's almost like, hey, is this the hill you really want to die on? And then I'm like, you know what? That really calms me down right now. No, I will die on a different hill. The hill hasn't come yet, but one day it will come, and I will answer yes to that question.
I just want to point out one thing. Are we gonna ignore the fact that Justin completely shaved right now? I don't know if that's his trigger or not, but he looks 10 years younger.
I want to
I feel like it's a whole nother person that's on this podcast.
Hey, keep my beard out of your mouth, man. Keep it out of your mouth.
Someone slapped your beard off. Oh man.
Dad.
That's funny.
Best episode of the year so far.
That is hilarious. Yeah, I didn't want to call it out, but somebody found the fountain of youth.
Trigger warning.
Yes. So yeah, some people might be offended. And you're talking about your facial hair, but no, it's an interesting point, right? Like there are some kills that we should die on, and we should stand up for, right? We shouldn't just like let everything pass over. My wife is joking with me. She's like, would you stand up for me that way? I'm like, of course I'd stand up for you, but I'd probably give him a stern talking to, right? Like wag my finger, but I can't slap someone for that. It'd be like, somebody made a joke. I'd be like, man, I really like comedy.
But
really
I also hope that like Jen would be like, Joby, you're about to make a fool of yourself, of our family, of our reputation. Sit your butt down. We'll take care of this later, right? Like, I hope there's some.
Not allow me to
Exactly.
hit someone in the face.
It's like, would you? I appreciate the thought. Never do the action.
Right.
I was thinking the other day when this whole thing was going on to like, that triggered him, right? Like, not to talk about the specific incidents, but the whole thing about Jada, Will Smith got triggered, went and slapped Chris Rock. And we're all sitting here like on two sides of it, where it's like, well, he's a comedian. He's going to make fun of everybody. That's what he does. Like, we're just easily offended. And then I wonder, are we not offended enough? Right. Like not to say that we should always be triggered by everything, right? There is a line of jokes and whatever. But then I'm like, as Christians, what if like we were sitting there and it was like this joke about Jesus, about whatever, right? Like, is that going to get our blood boiling, or are we going to justify and be like, hey, he's just a comedian, he offends everybody? So it's really interesting of like what that line is, and should we be more offended? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really great question, right? So how do we react to it? Because I think there's a purpose in engaging conflict. I think there's, I read this, small group curriculum years ago from the Gospel Center Life to deal with conflict. There's attackers and withdrawers. There's some people who engage in conflict and then they attack. That's their response. They just engage and I'm going to fight back because I'm going to win somehow. And then there's some people who withdraw and they're like, you know what? I'm going to avoid this situation completely. I'm going to just, say whatever you want, right? And both of those things are unhealthy approaches. And it feels like you have to kind of mediate somewhere in the middle to engage in the dialogue, because if I was really offended, I need to let you know that was offended. I can't smack you in the face, but
Right.
I might need to engage in dialogue with you. So yeah, that's a great point. I think we should be offended when we are truly hurt, right? There's no way to hide from that.
Yeah, no, that's we need to be open, honest with our feelings, just like you said, Joby. And at the same time, too, I think you were talking a little bit about, how do we sort of resolve these conflicts, or at least address when something offends us. And I would say, like, you know what, if something happens to you in private, it makes sense. Go to your offender in private and try to resolve that. And of course, if they don't listen, you go the biblical route, bring a couple people with you, etc. But then when something happens publicly, right, I think oftentimes, like, I do think maybe it should be addressed publicly, right? Like, how do I wish he resolved it? I'm not exactly sure. Maybe you show your displeasure somewhere else. Maybe you take, the mic during your speech that you would have won, and you use that in some sort of way. But, I think the way that we respond also publicly has to, at the very least, like, be a good witness as well. And I'm not sure what the best way would have been.
So, all right, let me ask you guys a question then. If there was have you been in a situation where a comedian or someone made jokes about Christianity or about what you believe in or about your culture or whatever? Have you ever been offended by those comments, or do you just kind of wash it out?
No, I've been offended by comments like that. And sometimes I just don't laugh. Like, if I was in the audience, I'd be like, that's not funny, right?
Mm.
But I can't stop them from making the joke.
No, true.
But yeah.
No, I agree. And it was funny because this goes back to Family Guy, right? I think this is the one that comes to mind. There was an episode years ago, if you guys have ever watched Family Guy, where Peter Griffin gets this old CD of the song called Surfing Bird, and everyone knows the Surfing Bird episode. And throughout this episode, they kind of bring Jesus back, and he kind of like goes down this wrong path, and this entire like ridiculous story about what happens when Jesus comes back to earth and he's just kind of chilling. And I'll be honest, I think when I was younger, it was hilarious to me. But I think as I got older, to your point, yes, those kind of things ought to get my blood to boil, because it does sort of publicly reduce, who Jesus ought to be to us. How do I respond to that? I don't know. Do I write a letter to Seth MacFarlane? I'm not sure. But no, that's a great question, DeJoy.
Yeah. No, I think it's definitely something worth exploring, because I don't think we should learn from this situation to say never get offended or let everything roll off your back, and then or go the opposite extreme and just attack everybody, right? It's almost like, how do we reconcile with each other, right? I think the Bible calls us to reconcile with each other. How do you reconcile situations where there's obvious conflict? I'm obviously hurt. I can't hide that. Will Smith was obviously hurt. And if somebody offended my family, I would be obviously hurt. So like, how do we restore the relationship? And maybe that's a challenge to like our listeners too. Like if all of us are going to get into conflicts or have been in conflicts, how do you resolve those things in a very healthy way?
I think oftentimes we choose to be passive. That, like that's the opposite for us. It's like either we react or we don't react at all. That idea of like, what does it look like to, like we were talking about, pull someone aside and let them know how we were offended and how we feel. Like, I don't think a lot of us are not like that. We care so much about what people think, and we just want to be peaceable with everybody that by the time we get to a point where we feel like we can approach someone about it, it's not boiling over for us anymore. And then we just pass it off as like, it's fine. I'm over it. Like, whatever. If it happens again, I'll talk to him. Right. Like that's the kind of attitude. So I think we have a tendency to be more passive than we are active about that.
Yeah. And I was going to say, to your question too, Job, and, sometimes when we get to that level with someone else, it's hard for us to go to them one-on-one. Yeah, I get that. Sometimes the Bible will be like, hey, if you have a sacrifice and you're going to bring it to the altar, but you remember you have a conflict with someone, just leave it there, go reconcile, and then come back. But sometimes that's significantly harder said than done, right? And it was funny, still within thinking about the Oscars, I like how P. Diddy came out and it's like, you know what, after party, Will, Chris, we're going to figure this out, talk to this like brothers. And actually sent you guys a quote, but an excerpt from a Yahoo article that was put out earlier this week. Denzel was giving, an interview, and he kind of said this too, which for me was really, really telling. He said, fortunately, there were people there, not just me, but others. Tyler Perry came immediately over there with me, and we said some prayers. I don't want to say what we talked about, but for the grace of God, go any of us. Who are we to condemn? I don't know all the ins and outs of the situation, but I know the only solution was prayer. That's the way that I see it. And I'm like, man, even in this situation, right? Like when you see two other people in conflict, what's your first reaction? I think we're all talking about it and it's great and we need to learn lessons. But, how striking was it that Denzel and Tyler Perry's first reaction is, let me pull this dude over and let's pray first. Right.
Yeah.
And that's huge. And I think that's a lesson we all can learn from that situation, right? Like, what is our first reaction when we see two others conflict? Are we going to be peacemakers and agents of reconciliation? Are we going to just talk about stuff, or are we just going to pray with them first and let God do the healing?
Yeah, well said. I think that's a great way to like think about it. In conflict, we could be the offended or we could be the offenders, but then also sometimes we're on the peripheral, right? And we might be on the outside looking in at people who are in conflict. What can we do as a community, right? Like, hey, instead of gossiping about it and trying to figure out who did what and who's to blame, maybe we could be the peacemakers. I think those are the most important characters in this story that we could probably learn from is, Denzel Washington, right? So what a good
And I'm surprised by, that part of it did get a little bit of attention.
Yeah.
Which I'd be surprised because I would think that they wouldn't cover that at all, right? And they would just focus on the conflict and not on like the advice or whatever that he got. And I almost wonder if it's because it's Denzel and Medea, that were praying for him. I wonder if that's why. But yeah, it's interesting because normally stuff like that wouldn't get the media attention.
I think it's really great. I mean, what did Denzel say? He said, at your highest moment, be careful. That's when the devil comes for you, which is really powerful. It's true, right? It's sometimes we got to just be, have our wits about us, right? When things are going good, and every one of us can be in that situation, and we can all snap at a moment's notice, right? With everything going on in the world. But I think we can all learn lessons, right? As a community, because there are some things that could trigger us, and we can't possibly know what could be those triggers in other people, but we should really be careful in what we say to other people and how we treat each other. And I think there's some really great lessons learned here. So guys, thanks for dissecting this wonderful bit of juicy celebrity gossip. But I think there's some really important lessons for our community. So thanks for going over it, and love to hear your feedbacks. Please keep coming. Let those questions come in. Use our Ask Us Anything link and send those in. But appreciate you guys jumping on today.
Yep. Don't slap
Thanks,
anyone
guys.
at your next general body meeting. All right. That's the advice
Yeah.
for the week.
Don't
Keep
don't
your hands to
get
yourself.
don't get Will Smith. Be careful
Kid
about
Will Smith.
careful about what you say to people.
Be careful. All
right,
right, guys. See ya. Thanks for listening to this episode. Check us out at restoringourcity.org, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify to get the latest content. The Restoring Our City podcast is hosted by Jobin Verghese, Jeswyn Thomas, and Bejoy Samuel. Graphics by Claire Skelly, Alexander Skowalski, and Teresa Studley. Our music is Jazzy Abstract Beat by Coma Media from Pixabay. Thanks again for listening.